Matt, what's going on, dude? Welcome to the Dad Edge.
Hey, Larry, thanks for having me.
You're welcome, man. Thank you for coming on. This is a hell of a topic. I feel very underdressed for our interview, man. Like you're looking dapper. You even got the sports jacket on. You got the handkerchief out. Like, yeah,
This is my
it's
favorite
on point.
jacket.
I like it, man. I like it. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt. Unfortunately, I am on the road to recovery. I injured my knee really bad, so I'm sitting here with crutches and so I haven't really been able to. I guess I could dress from the waist up, make it look like I got something on. But I always feel weird doing that. Like got a pair of shorts on, no shoes, with like a suit. It's like half,
Right,
half and half.
right.
But yeah, man, we're gonna talk about some really good stuff today. Before we get started, just share with us what your family looks like for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So I married my high school sweetheart. We fell in love back in junior, senior year in high school, two different high schools, and have been together ever since. We have three kids. My oldest is 20 years old. I can't believe that. I don't feel that old, but I have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 16-year-old. So I'm very much in the launch and pre-launch phases of parenting, and I have two daughters and a son, and we live here in Colorado.
That's awesome. It's how you don't hear this story of people staying together ever since they were younger. What do you looking back? So like how long you guys been together total?
25 years coming up
Wow.
this next year will be our 25th. But we dated for about 3 years before that, so we have spent a lot of time together.
All right, so give us some know-how here. Give us some breadcrumbs. In order to have a successful relationship, even that long,
Mm.
as you look back on your relationship and your marriage, how have you guys navigated this? How have you guys navigated still being together successfully? And I see you guys online. What it looks like, you guys look insanely happy together. Like things are working really, really well. It's very apparent in the photos I've seen on your website and what I've seen online.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, we're best friends, and in a large sense, Laura and I grew up together. And so, unlike other couples who might meet in their 30s and have to, they've already kind of established these patterns of life and habits that might have to be adjusted. Laura and I really grew up together, so we didn't have to cross some of those hurdles. So that may have been a little bit easier for us than, per se, other couples. But we're best friends, and I think we've invested in each other's success, and I think our mindset is that way. Instead of being selfish with, hey, this is my career and you have to support my career, we really support each other's careers, and we've really worked together as well. And I'm not sure all couples could pull this off, but we work really well together. I like to say I'm street smart, she's book smart. So especially in this counter trafficking fight, that's really mattered. That I lean on her and she leans on me, and together we make this formidable force together. The other thing I would say is date nights and counseling. I don't know of any marriage that's just handed to somebody. You have to work on that thing. You have to build it. You have to lean into difficult conversations with each other. You have to find that sense of courage and grace and love in those conversations, that you're not you're talking to a partner, not a combatant. And when you're vulnerable and honest about your needs and wants, and you have to listen to their needs and wants, it's a sacred place, and it's a difficult place, but it's the conversation that you must have. If gone unspoken, can kind of form this sense of resentment and lack of knowledge about each other, and you start to drift, especially when you have teenagers. And when that drift starts to happen, I can tell it somatically in my body. I get, angry and resentful, and you just have to lean into it and not foster those feelings. Those are deceptive feelings. Your partner's not against you. That's all in your head. But when
Mm.
you can get to that place where you say, "Hey, I'm not going to believe those lies I'm telling myself about my needs and wants and her needs and wants. We're going to come together and we're going to have a date night. We're going to have hard conversations out of love and grace." Um, that's really where the magic happens. But if you don't have those hard conversations, a distance forms. and that's what you got to fight against. So those are just a few breadcrumbs, like you said. I think investing in a marriage and building a marriage is the order of the day. No one's handed an easy marriage. No such thing.
I 100% agree with that. Can I share something with you that I literally just posted as you and I are recording 52 minutes ago? And I
Yeah.
think it's right. Yeah, it's right in line with what you said. So I posted, I'll hold this up, but I posted this quote, which is, if you want to save your marriage, the best approach is to be proactive in learning how. Don't be reactive when there's a problem. So that's the caption on Instagram. And then this is the context. When it comes to our teeth, some people will go to the dentist every 6 months for a cleaning, while others will wait for their teeth to fall out before taking action. When it comes to our car, some people will get routine oil changes every 5,000 miles, while others wait until their engine is on the brink of failing before taking action. When it comes to our health, some people eat healthy and exercise, while others will wait for a heart attack before taking action. Marriage is no different. We can be proactive and learn how to create a better connection, communication, intimacy with our spouse, or we can wait till the relationship is on the brink of disaster and ending. Both approaches, proactive and reactive, require work, and it's up to us what work we are willing to do. We have to decide which one we want. And you shared in here that you know marriage is work. It's not handed to us. You also said two words in there that really resonated with me, which is best friend, which I think is fascinating because my boys and I were just talking about this. My boys are 17, 15, 9, and 7. My two older ones and I were talking about this, and they were asking me about marriage. And they're like, what is one of the secrets to marriage? And it was right in line. I'm not going to repeat the themes that you had, but basically I was like, marriage is work, but it's good work. It's work that it requires forgiveness and compromise and grace and all these things. But she's also my best friend. And they're in that camp of like, oh no, you're friends or your girlfriend, boyfriend, one of two. I was like, and they're like, she's not your best friend, she's your wife. I was like, no, she's also my best friend. Like literally,
Mm-hmm.
she's like, there's no other person on the planet that I love spending time with more than her. And it's because like at the foundation of who we are best friends. Like she is my buddy, I'm her buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to do life with my best friend, who I'm also obviously have an intimate relationship with, but she's also my best friend. But we both signed up for this knowing that this is going to be work. And we went through half of our marriage. We've been married for 20 years. We went through half of it thinking that, well, marriage is just something that's kind of handed to you and you're more reactive with it. And then the last half has been like, let's put very specific parameters in place that we can navigate this thing properly. And I'll give you one other example. So I showed you I'm on crutches right now. For the past 10 weeks, I've been dealing with a horrible injury to my knee that required surgery. And I was basically like, I couldn't go up and down the stairs for a few weeks, like to do my own laundry. And I'm one of those people, man, that I'm like, hey, we're in this together. I share the workload, you share the workload, we're in this together. Well, she is picking up a tremendous amount of the workload because I've been like, incapacitated. And I know it's been wearing on her. So it was months ago, I was like, we're always so proactive with going out and getting help from like we have a counselor. We've had a counselor like for like 20 years, like that we call on like 3 times a year at this point. I was like, I think it'd probably be best if we schedule a couple appointments with Tom because we're in a new chapter and neither one of us really know how to navigate this one. And we're both probably making a lot of assumptions. And the last thing that I want is you're doing a shit ton of work right now.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, people can get very resentful or they're trying to reinvent how we operate. What would it be like if we were proactive and we just learned how to do this together and we were proactive instead of reactive? And she's like, oh, I'm all like, sign me up, let's go. And I think that's a good approach. But I think a lot of people, as we wrap up this last segment, a lot of people are under the impression, well, marriage should just be. It should just work. Like we love each other, isn't that enough? And if it is work, does that mean we don't truly love each other? Does that mean we're not meant to be? A lot of people I think get really tripped up on like if I have to work at it, is it everything that it should be? Are we really meant for each other? My answer to that is yeah, most of the time it is, but it does require a little bit of work. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I really like the word safe harbor. that what we're trying to create in a marriage is safe harbor, where we can really trust each other and let down your hair. I also like the image of a garden, that we're tending a garden of our marriage, making sure the soil is rich enough, that there's enough nutrients for the plants. You're weeding, there's weeds that pop up in your marriage. So those images are really central for me as I talk about with Laura, hey, you're my safe harbor. And anytime there's conflict between us, it damages that safe harbor. And we have to repair that. Or anytime, there might be, I'm just assuming for others, addiction or workaholism, where you're decentralizing your marriage as that safe harbor, and you're trying to find safe harbor somewhere else, that damages that relationship between you and the most important person in your life. You have to come back and you have to tend that garden. You have to rebuild that safe harbor. And I have lots of friends of mine that go through marital strife. And some of it has to do with their childhood traumas. And I have a lot of childhood trauma as well. And I have trauma from my work here, going undercover, fighting
I
human
can.
trafficking. And so I'm in counseling, and my counselor said this brilliant thing to me once. She said, Matt, you're responsible as an individual for 80% of your needs and wants. And so often
Wait,
I think we,
are you saying people shouldn't read our minds? Is that what you're saying? Come
yeah,
on, man.
well, and we shouldn't expect our spouses to lift more than they're supposed to lift as it relates to my health. I'm an individual man. I'm responsible for my emotions. I'm responsible for my words. I'm responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for my legacy. My wife can help 20% of that, and vice versa. She's supposed to meet 80% of her needs as well. And if we can't get to that place of health, mental wellness, physical wellness, it's probably an indicator that we need to work through some of our childhood traumas. These things that manifest in our lives as addiction, or manifest in our lives even as drama addiction. There's I've learned through my counseling that there are traumas that I am addicted to because of the endorphin release that takes place when you're undercover and when you're in a dangerous environment. I have grown addicted to that. I didn't even know that was a thing, but you think about
Wow.
people in war zones and that adrenaline rush. Well, that's not something my wife can fix for me. And oftentimes, I think when we have those symptoms, it causes friction for that safe harbor we're trying to build with our spouse. And we got to do our own work as men. And we got to go seek out, how do I find healing? That's something that oftentimes we put on our spouse. And we get mad at them because they don't behave the way we want, or missed expectations. But in a healthy sense, we need to work on ourselves so that we can be the men, the husbands and fathers that our families need us to be.
I 100% agree with that. Expectations unmet expectations can lead to disastrous things, but uncommunicated, unmet expectations, well, that's on us, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yes.
you have to be able to share, what it is that you expect. I want to actually move to this part of your life where you and your wife were in Thailand and you felt called, to support, kids in poverty, and you saw some pretty. I mean, you've already alluded to what you've been doing, but I don't obviously what you're doing with the trafficking, like trying to prevent that. That was never what you went over there for, correct? It
That's
was,
right.
yeah, you went over there for something totally different, but then you saw these things happen.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what you wanted to do, why you wanted to do it, but then suddenly it was revealed that there was a whole big other calling out there for you.
Yeah. So my wife and I had an opportunity to move to Thailand to run a children's home. And since we were young, I would say in high school, early college, we had a passion for the global poor, and we wanted to help. It was very simple. Hey, where there's poverty and suffering, we desire to step in and just figure out how can I be of service? How can we, reduce some amount of human suffering? And so when we got this opportunity to move to Thailand with our three kids to run a children's home of impoverished hill tribe minority groups, we were thrilled. We are like, man, this is great. This is our calling. And we moved to Thailand up in the northern region. And we had 48 young girls in our children's home. In Thai, it's called Bandet Gampra. And it's not really an orphanage as much as it was a boarding school for impoverished girls. And so we set about the work of running that and caring for these young girls. But in that process, I heard rumors about human trafficking in the community of nonprofit workers. Some people were in Thailand fighting trafficking, and Laura and I didn't know anything about human trafficking, but we were responsible to care for these 48 young women. And so I started to listen and tell me more about human trafficking. And there was a significant rumor about traffickers going up into the villages where the impoverished communities were and recruiting the pretty girls to come and work in larger cities and then send money back to mom and dad. That was the rumor. And the police would say, hey, those girls end up never going home. They're tricked into prostitution, they're tricked into slavery, and they're threatened with all kinds of abuses if they try to escape or if they tell mom and dad. So I was hearing this stuff, and I just got into a truck with my assistant director, who was a Lisu man, and drove to the border of Myanmar and interviewed the village leaders where these minority groups were. And so, if you can imagine, I was sitting around the outdoor fire with chickens running around and dirt floors and huts, and asking these village leaders, does this actually happen? Is this a thing? And they're like, yeah, it happens all the time. In fact, we have a saying here in the village that there are no pretty girls here. It was so systematic, this recruitment and transport of pretty young children, that there was a known saying that there were no pretty girls in the village. And for me, as a dad, I'm like, okay, something's going on here that's systematic, something's wrong. And so I met with the Thai Royal Police, and I just said, look, I don't know what's going on, but I'm running this foundation, and I'm taking care of these young girls. I need to learn more about human trafficking. And they commissioned me as a volunteer to work with the Thai Royal Police and do research on it for a year. And after that year, I had traveled Thailand widely and met with NGOs and started to get phone calls about 13-year-old girls for sale on this street corner or in that restaurant or in this dark alley. And I would kind of share that with police that I was working with. And eventually the police said, Matt, it would be really helpful if you would go undercover and verify that these children were for sale, because everything we're hearing is hearsay, it's third party. But if you go, we would act on that. So they deputized me into the Thai Royal Police, and I began to go into these establishments and places known for human trafficking, and traffickers would sell children to me. And I would film that with undercover body-worn devices, share that intelligence with police, and then we would make an arrest and rescue those children. But I mean, what I just described to you was such a leap for me from, hey, my high school sweetheart and I and our three kids are running a children's home, to all of a sudden being asked by the Thai Royal Police to go undercover to rescue children the same ages as mine and arrest those who would abuse them and enslave them. That was such a challenging time of my life. And I would say Laura and I had to grow very, very close during this time, because I was in harm's way. These traffickers aren't the nicest guys you've ever met. They are trying to protect their illicit trade. So I was putting myself in harm's way. I was having to figure out how to do this and keep my marriage safe and strong, because you're exposed to all manner of evil. Um, and so Laura and I grew very, very close during this time, and she would watch my covert footage. That was an accountability I had with her. Like, I'm going to go undercover into these places. I don't know what's going on, except children are being sold. And she would watch back my covert footage to be a part of that with me. Um, and we grew incredibly deeply close through that process. But that's how I got started into this work.
Man. So completely, totally unexpected of what you signed up for to even
Yeah,
begin with.
yeah.
Did you ever think for did you ever think it would turn into anything like that? I mean, did you ever think for a moment that you'd be doing what it is you're doing?
No, and I don't think I would ever choose it. And what I mean by that is, you know, I've been an undercover operative for over 13 years. I've been in 3,000 plus brothels in 6 continents. Stood up nonprofits around the world to do this work with police because kids are being abused. And I don't know that if we, if we, if we knew what it would cost, we would make the same choices. Um, you know, starting a nonprofit from nothing, especially in this space of child sex trafficking, where uh, there's danger, there's law enforcement corruption you have to deal with, there's accountabilities you have to ensure that are in place, there's mental wellness. The exposure to child sexual abuse is horrific. Um, you know, if you knew all of that in the beginning, I don't know that you would walk that path. But it really comes back down to this one moment when Laura and I decided to launch a nonprofit called the Exodus Road to do this work, where we sat down, and I had been undercover a couple of times with the police, and you know, we weren't sure that we could impact change for anybody. We didn't have any answers. In fact, I had other nonprofit leaders come up to me and say, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're doing." And I'm like, "I don't know what I'm doing." But here's the deal. Somebody's kid has been tricked. That, you know, parents have been tricked in this scenario oftentimes. And they were approached by a trafficker who lied to them and said, "Hey, there's a really good job for your child in Bangkok or another country, and I'm going to take them there, and they're going to send money home to you." Well, that sounds like the lottery, you know, for a villager, for a farmer. And we do this here in America, right? We like send our kids off for a better opportunity than what we had as kids. You know, we have this dream of opportunity and career and future, and we do the same thing. We send our kids off based on the information that we have. But what if that information was a lie? And what we as parents had ultimately done is sold our children into a life of forced rape for profit for somebody, you know. And so for me, when I sat down with my wife at the beginning of this, it came to the head of like, look, I've sat with these villagers, these parents who sent their kids off with the hope of a better future. And they can't find their kids now. They're gone. They've been stolen away. They're slaves somewhere miles and miles away. What if this were us? We have 3 kids, and at the time they were 4, 6, and 8. What if this had happened to our kids? You know, what would we not do as parents to get them home? And you have to understand, a lot of times these kids that are being sold globally, and they're being sold in the US too, there's not this mechanism to find them. Parents don't typically have that. You know, in the US we rely on maybe, you know, Find My iPhone app or the Life 360 or these tracking apps where we track our kids. But what if we didn't have that? What if we had no means by which we could find our children, and we're the ones who put them in the car or put them on the plane with the hope of a better future? And so for Laura and I, when we first started, it was like, I don't have all the answers, but I want to do all that I can do to impact change for just that person in front of me that needs help. And in working with police and learning kind of what they were doing and why it wasn't working, I was able to insert technology, GPS tracking devices I got off Amazon, which they didn't have. And we would rescue boys being delivered to pedophile groups in Asia with a GPS tracking device that cost $150. And so in that way, we started to learn how can we really support good men and women, law enforcement officers who will make a difference if they're resourced properly. But I got to tell you, I never dreamed we would be sitting where we are today, having impacted 2,500 now free victims of human trafficking, now survivors. I never would have imagined we would have arrested almost 1,600 perpetrators who are buying and selling children just by showing up and doing all you can do to solve a problem. It blows my mind. This work, though, has changed me in every way. The man that I am today looks way different than the man who started this about 13 years ago. And I think there's a beauty in that kind of growth. It is grit. It is nights and nights on your knees praying to God for some kind of solution to something impossible. It is nights with your wife crying over what you've seen, the hope you have for kids that aren't yours. You can't help but change, I think, when you hang out with those vulnerable people.
How has it changed you for the good?
Well, for one, I think man, so many ways. There's a type of suffering in the world that when you are near it, the problems that we typically face kind of fade away. They're not really that big a deal in light of child sexual exploitation, So I think I've gotten a much thicker skin to what the world. I used to say it this way: I had a version of the world that wasn't real, that I lived by, and I had to surrender that version for the world that is. And the world that is requires me to be a much stronger man with thicker skin. The world needs men who will step into dark alleys for the right reasons. And to become that individual, you have to grow strong in ways that no one can just teach you, I don't think. The weapon we really wield is courage. One of my country directors says that. The weapon we choose is courage. To be an advocate for someone else. And it's a very selfless act to go in search of that individual who cannot leave on their own. These are individuals that are locked in basements and, been lied to. They don't know how to get home. And to be that individual who's looking for them, it takes a resilience and a patience. So I think in all those ways I've grown. I've had to become a fundraiser. I wouldn't say I've ever enjoyed fundraising, but in the nonprofit world, whatever good you do has to be fueled with dollars that aren't typically going to come from the federal government. You have to go find people who believe in the cause, and man, that's changed me. I used to be afraid that people, when you ask people for money, it feels horrible. Have you ever tried that? Jeez. But you start to realize people want to help. They're looking for me as much as I'm looking for them. And I'm just making needs known. I'm not actually responsible to raise the money. I'm responsible to make the needs known. And the people who are meant to underwrite the rescue operation will come. And it doesn't always happen the way I hope. But my job is not to raise money. It's to make the need known. And so in all these ways, 13 years of running a global nonprofit, you have, it's grit. It's grit. You grow. and you do get traumatized, but you deal with those traumas. And there is nothing stronger than a well-healed scar. It's ever so much stronger than if you never had the wound.
Has this, speaking of wounds, you said that you've seen things that have been traumatic. You've seen things that you can't unsee. I have, I have a brother who's a firefighter.
Yeah.
My best friend is a cop, and especially my friend who's a cop, he's like, there are things that I've seen I can never erase off the hard drive in my mind, no
Mhm.
matter what I do. And not to compare the three of you guys, but I'm sitting here thinking about 1,600 kids, right? My kids have the day off today, if you can hear them screaming in the background. This is why we call it the Dad Edge podcast, right?
That's right.
But, 1,600 kids saved, 2,500 people arrested. I can only imagine the things that you've seen. And it's something that, quite frankly, I'm not envious of. I cannot imagine the things that you have seen. With that being said, you come across to me as a good man, and you've seen the darkness in humanity. You've seen, and there's a part of you that might even be quite jaded. Like, man, I have seen some evil that I didn't even know was possible out there. Yet this has changed you for the good. Had what process have you had to go through in order to take in things that you've seen, you've heard, experienced, and somehow, some way unpack it into being a good, strong man who continues to fight this fight for good?
I mean, it's such a great question, Larry, and I think it has everything to do with how we deal with trauma. Um, I have been a student of trauma for years now, my childhood trauma and adult trauma, and how that manifests somatically in my body. Um, and the real indicator, I've been doing this 13 years, and it was about 4 or 5 years in, I had a real anger problem, just being very vulnerable with everybody. I started to notice, man, my fuse was really short, and I just never remembered a time before this work where I had a really short fuse. But man, the kids would be annoying, or they didn't load the dishwasher properly, whatever it is, and I just would get angry and um, have to apologize to them afterwards. And I got tired of doing that, and I started to do some just internal work on, hey, surely this work is having an impact on my soul and on my spirit. And I had thought early days, when Laura and I started the Exodus Road, there was this question in my mind, like, how long can an individual do this work? How many years can you put yourself in these situations and remain healthy as a husband and as a father? And it had really gotten to that point where I was like, man, maybe I'm done. Maybe I need to stop because, um, I don't want to be a bad dad or a bad husband. So I went to counseling. I went to an amazing place called Onsite, and I can't speak highly enough about it. It was a 6-day intensive trauma therapy retreat. When I think of retreat, I think of tequila and the beach, but this was different. And it was all about unpacking your trauma and finding healing in the midst of it. And I mean, guys, I just tell you, my life has changed through that process, but it gave me a deep respect for what trauma does to us. It shapes the way we think, the way we see the world. And if left unchecked, it can get to be very unhealthy. And there's all kinds of trauma thoughts that are also turned into automatic thoughts. So something happens in your life and your first reaction is a trauma thought. Overgeneralization or personalization, or there's I think 16 core automatic trauma thoughts that you don't mean to, but your brain programs as a survival mechanism, right? From trauma. So a good example is I saw a guy stabbed to death uh, undercover once, and he bled out, and I saw that, and it's a horrible thing. Cops see that stuff, firefighters see that stuff. That leaves a traumatic impression. There is no situation, I don't think, where you would see that and not receive trauma. And your body and your brain are like, hey, we got to keep you alive. So we're going to create a pattern of thinking, a heightened level of stress. But that trauma, it's like a wound in your soul. It keeps you at a heightened level of stress. So as a dad, you can never relax. As a husband, you can never relax. And you bring that trauma into your home, and you bring that trauma into your safe harbor, into that garden you're trying to tend. And if left undealt with, you don't mean to, but that trauma can really ruin your marriage, and it can ruin your fatherhood if left unchecked. So for me, uh, and I'll just be honest with you, this takes a lot of vulnerability to open the kimono and say I'm not the man of steel that I wish my kids thought that I was. But man, do they not need that? Do they not need to know that us as dads bleed? Oh my gosh, they need that. And so my kids know I go to counseling. They know I struggle with trauma. I still apologize when my trauma kind of reaches to that point where I have a short fuse, and then I go back and I do somatic work. I do box breathing. I manage my stress. And I lead, we have 60 investigators around the world, 100 staff across 6 nonprofits, and we're leading them in how to deal with trauma, because you can't do this work and not be impacted, but you can deal with that and heal from that and become stronger from that. I think one of the ways I've changed the most is I have empathy.
Yeah.
I have a level of understanding of what people go through, especially these survivors of human trafficking. I don't know if you guys are big on Lord of the Rings. I'm sure somebody who's listening is. But when Frodo gets stabbed with that Orcon blade, and then Gandalf says later he'll carry that wound the rest of his life. There are things as men we see and we experience where we never fully recover. But if we allow them to, they can make us stronger. And I love that image of a healed scar. I can't undo the fact that I was wounded, but I can be healed from that. I'll carry that scar with me, but I can be better for it. I could be gentler, but I had to really get through that trauma. I really had to embrace it. I had to lean into it. I had to get help, people who knew what was happening internally, because a lot of us don't have words for this stuff. We're just mad. We're just pissed off. Why am I mad at my kid? So I just say all that to say it's been a lot of deeply intentional, purposeful, humbling work. But man, I'm so thankful for it.
I think what you did here, especially, I think all of us can relate to I don't want my kids to see me knocked down. I don't want my kids to even see me as
Right.
somewhat like a human being, right? Because what credibility will they give me if I'm not the strong, leader that they expect me to be, that I even expect me to be?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're missing a huge lesson here to actually show our kids. Number one, when we are a human being and all its imperfections, and that makes us really relatable to our kids. Like they actually trust us more because we're self-aware. I make this joke a lot, but it's like, are you a fan of The Office, Matt?
I love The Office.
Yeah. So it's like Michael Scott. Why is it that his employees are so annoyed by him? Why do you think that is? I'm just asking you.
Because he's supposed to be the leader,
Yeah,
and
but what is he?
I don't know what.
He's
He's hilarious.
completely, he is hilarious, by the way, but he's completely and totally unaware, self-aware.
Oh,
He
sure.
has no self-awareness whatsoever. He thinks he's awesome and he's a mess. He's an idiot. Like, but he's the only one that thinks he's awesome. Everybody else can see right through it.
Right.
But if he were to come to his team and say, guys, I've really failed you as a leader. And I know I've done these things and I've tried to cover it up even by pretending that I'm a leader. And I've
Mm-hmm.
come to the realization that I'm not a leader. However, I'm now going to go learn the skills and what it takes to be the most effective leader possible for you and this team. Like him being a human being, even a quote unquote broken human being that doesn't have the skills, they'd probably be like, well, damn, Michael Scott, that's pretty cool, right? Okay. And then
Yeah.
there might be an intuition with them to then maybe trust him because he's like,
Hmm.
well, at least he's self-aware. Like, at least he knows. We all see it. He doesn't see it, but at least he knows now. But when it
Right.
comes to us being fathers, I think that's one of the most beautiful gifts we can give our kids is the gift of we are human, we are imperfect, and at times we are a bit broken.
Hmm.
By the same token, what's also really important and the incredible gift that we can give our kids is exactly what it is that you're laying out here, which is like in the times where I am broken, I don't know the right answer, I don't know how to cope with this, I'm angry, I'm sorting out things or whatever it is. I'm going to go do these things that I know that are going to help me. Whether it's seeing a counselor, whether it's seeing a coach, whether it's doing my box breathing, whether it's doing this, it's these tactical tools that are actually going to make us a better human being. Because think about it, just as men in general, we are not like we never really learn coping skills or what to do with what it is that we're facing from our dads. It's because they,
Hmm.
quite frankly, they didn't know, and they probably didn't know because their dads didn't know. Like me growing up, I remember my mom was married for 6 years. Time I was 4 to 10, my stepdad, and he was ex-military. And literally, if I ever broke down as a kid, I'm talking like 4, 5, 6 years old. Like, only babies cry. Don't be a little girl, right? Suck it up.
Hmm.
Basically, suck it up. And his favorite term, man up. Grow a set of balls, little man.
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that there is a time and a place for that, but it needs to be minimal, right? Because to be honest, like I think some of our generation that we're raising is they're a bit airy fairy fluffy. They're kind of like some of them are too delicate of flowers, right?
Hmm.
And they haven't had a mixture of compassion, empathy, real tools, and at times, rarely, but at times, some tough love. Be like, dude, like, look, we've talked about this endlessly. We know where you're at this point. You just need to get off your ass. Like, and let's go, right? Sometimes you have to have that conversation with your kids, but not in place of all the other things that we're doing 80, 90% of the time. But going back to what I was saying was your kids are watching you. Your kids are watching, my kids are watching me. Everybody in the audience, your kids are watching you. And if they see a human being, which they will, that's faced with adversity, that's faced with stress, that's faced with obstacles, and they see that guy bury it down and actually not do anything about it or just take it out on them, we're actually missing the boat in teaching our kids by example of what good could look like. Yes, I'm not perfect. Yes, I'm a human being. Yes, at times I'm weak, but here's what I'm doing to go build my strength back up again, right? I'm not
Yeah.
just covering it up with booze, weed, porn, scrolling on Instagram, trying to like numb myself from it. I'm actually dealing with it, and that's what I think you've done. You very tactically deal with things. Your kids are watching you do this stuff, which I think is really powerful, man.
Yeah, and I think we have to redefine success for ourselves. And the world kind of looks at money and the cars we drive. But for me, it's am I growing as a father? Am I growing as a husband? Am I healthy and growing as an individual? You know, the man up phrase, to me, it's like that's the type of thing you say in war or when you're in a survival situation or you're trying to get through something that is difficult and maybe emotional, and you kind of shove some of that down for survival reasons, and you pick up your firearm and you go into battle, or you do the difficult thing. You have to man up to do it. But if there's never a moment where you can lay that down and say, hey, I'm not going to battle today, I'm recovering, and I have to deal with those traumas, and I have to figure out, how am I going to deal with the world that is versus the world I wanted it to be. There's a reality here that calls me into being something different, something bigger, something stronger. And I have these young ones that I'm bringing up into this world, and they need to know how to take that armor off as well. If we leave our armor on all the time, we are dying inside. We're not
I
meant to
agree.
keep our armor on all the time. So if you're going to have safe harbor and be vulnerable and put your ego aside and be humble and say, hey, I'm not perfect. And my kids need to know that, because perfection is silly. It's a silly goal. The goal is this: I am improving. I am improving. And a lot of, as a nonprofit leader, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience feel this occasionally, people put you on a pedestal. People expect perfection. And I'm here to tell you, that's not me. But what you'll get
Yeah.
is a real honest attempt at perfection. But I'm gonna fall short. And I give myself grace to not be perfect. And I would hope other people would not expect me to be perfect. But the humility and the real power and the strength isn't in how thick your armor is and how great you are in battle. It's how quick you can learn from those mistakes and how humbly you can say, yeah, I need to take a vacation. I need to take my wife on a date. I do have weaknesses and I'm going to address those. Why? Because that's what the secret really is. Not pretending you're perfect like you think everybody wants you to be, not pretending, but being vulnerable enough to correct them. Say, I'm not perfect. Kids, I made a mistake. I'm very sorry that I did X, Y, and Z, and I'm dealing with that and I'm growing. I mean, that to me is what our kids need from us,
Yeah.
you know? I do
I
think
agree.
there's something magical about hardship as far as it's a catalyst for growth.
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of mentioned that, some folks in today's generation, might need to hear the man up phrase. And I think in some regards, as a society, we have a generation or two that have not had the same hardships that you and I had growing up or our parents had. And so those paradigms are colliding, you know. Um, we are more attuned, I think, as a society to emotional needs than we ever have been.
Yeah.
But there is a balance to that. There is still war to be had. There is still justice to fight for. There's dark alleys to walk down.
I agree.
And that's going to call us as men into something, and women, into something of strength, something maybe we have to grow into. I know I've had to grow into it. I didn't just start saving kids and know exactly how to do it. I had to grow into it, and it cost me greatly.
Yeah. And it's that growth is a journey, you know. I want to double down on one thing that you said because I think it was really, really profound. And then what I'd like to do as we wrap up here, I would love for you to share with us how we can be better about protecting our kids online. Because as we
Yeah.
stated before we recorded, you know, a lot of these kids are targeted online, and we're giving our kids like, you want to hear something crazy, Matt?
Yeah.
Like this blew my mind. So my wife just went, and maybe I'm old school, right? But then doing this podcast, kind of like you, right? Doing the work that you do, you've seen like some pretty heinous things. And because you've seen those heinous things, you're like, wow, the majority of the world probably doesn't realize like how bad things actually are and how people get to your kids and do this and do that. So I'm going to protect my kids, right? And so like we have a rule in our house that not one of our kids get a phone until 14 years old or 13 at the earliest, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
wife went on a field trip with my son who's a fourth grader. She's like, I was like, how's the field trip? She's like, oh, it was really, really cool. She's like, you want to hear something crazy? I was like, yeah. She's like, Lawson, he's my 9-year old. She's like, Lawson is one of 3 kids in his class who doesn't have a phone. I was like,
Wow.
what? She's like, yeah, all of them had a phone. I was like, these kids are in fourth grade. Not, they're 9 years old. She goes, yeah. Some of them had phones since they were in second grade. Like that's what I was told. And I was like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. So anyway, uh, I think we're dealing with a generation now where these devices are the norm and they're the window to the world, but they're also one of our podcast partner sponsors is Bark. You know, Bark is a technology that we use that basically it's a keyword software, and it picks up on suicidal ideation and alcohol and adult searches and predator activity online if your kids are being DM'd by somebody and that kind of thing. And I'm like, I can't imagine my life without that at this point. And so I want you to help us really understand, what we're up against. So that's the next segment. But I do want to double down on one thing you said, and that is, you know, the type of man that you are as a family, right? As a husband, there's a type of man you are. There's a type of man you are as a father. And then as we go out and like hunt and gather and try to dominate the world in our careers, whether it's our business or whatever, there's a different mentality that goes with that. And for the most part, those two worlds can coexist a little bit, but it can't be all or nothing. So I'll give you an example. One of my former clients, this goes back a few years ago, was a highly decorated Navy SEAL, and he emailed me, sent an email through our information box. Told me, he's like, I would really like some help and some coaching. I'm trying to establish a better relationship with my boys, and he left it at that. So I met with him on a discovery call, found out he was a Navy SEAL, all kinds of things that he had done, awards that he had won. And I was like, why do you need help from me? And I will never forget this. My kids don't need a highly decorated Navy SEAL.
Mm-hmm.
They need their dad. And he's like, and dude, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to turn this off. Like I want so badly to be this dad, and I'm trying to actually these are his words. I'm trying to convince my kids how great it was that how great it is that their dad is a Navy SEAL. And my kids are they're shaking their head. They're like, that doesn't, it's not really move. Like, in not so many words, they're like, yeah, it's not important to me. And what he realized was, I need to be their dad. So I think there's a huge truth bomb that you laid out when you shared what you did, which is being this man, being this different type of man that goes about family, that goes about marriage, that goes about being this compassionate, empathetic father who's imperfect, right? And also while, doing what you're doing, which is fighting this amazing fight of preventing sex trafficking, because I guarantee that there are different elements that you bring into those situations, right? I think it's important for men to realize that. So, but I digress, but I want to make sure that the audience heard that. But I want to get back to keeping our kids protected and keeping the target off their back with these predators that are online.
Yeah. So this year we'll rescue around 500 children this year alone across probably 150 cases. And we were looking at our case log and came up with this fact that 75% or maybe 74% of all cases that we have done here at the Exodus Road began with some type of online exploitation. And it ended, in slavery, physical forced slavery often, but it began online. And that's Facebook, Twitter, chat rooms. There's an app called Discord where kids are playing video games and chatting on that app. Snapchat. These are apps that are difficult for us as parents to monitor. I love that you brought up Bark. Bark's a great, useful tool. There's other tools as well that will help us as families protect our kids and create a sense of digital safety in our homes. But there has to be an education component for us as parents, but also for teenagers that just don't understand the dangers. Because they'll go to school, they leave your home and Bark's not always going to work on their school Wi-Fi, right? And we have cases here in America of kids being groomed by pedophiles at school through Google Chat. And what ends up happening, and I guess just a few breadcrumbs, is there is manipulation that takes place. Your child, I was just in Mexico City with the district attorney and cybercrimes division, and they were telling me about this case of a child who was playing a video game, chatting through Discord, and some other child, it was an adult male, pretending to be a child, gave this other child some diamonds, like currency for the game, as a gift. Well, and in exchange, he wanted a photo. And a few more diamonds later, and is a bit more of a risque photo, not crazy risque, not nudes, but a step towards that direction. Well, then he leveraged that as a threat. I'm going to show your mom. I'm going to put this on Facebook if you don't send me more photos. Well, this child was 13 years old. And I just want to say, what were you doing at 13 years old that would have equipped you for this scenario? I mean, I was in the backyard probably with the magnifying glass burning shit, when I was a kid. I wasn't equipped to deal with an adult pretending to be a child, manipulating me to get a photograph and then threatening me with that photograph. I wasn't equipped at 13 to handle that. So this individual, the child was in Mexico City. The individual perpetrator was in Colombia. There is no cybercrime law in Mexico to pursue that transnationally cross borders. The law just hasn't. A lot of countries don't have cybercrime law. So pedophiles are preying on our children, pretending to be children themselves, getting them to eventually curate child sexual abuse material or child sexual material. I'll tell you, when I first started going undercover with the Thai Royal Police, traffickers would sell me, back then that we called it child porn, they would sell it to you on a DVD, and they were all European kids. Now, traffickers are having the children themselves curate their own version of child porn, and they're selling these images widely. What does that mean for you guys? Well, number one, we have to protect our kids. They need to know that people you meet online may not be who they say they are. They may be trying to manipulate you into sending an image that they will then manipulate you with to get more sexual abuse material and sell that around. And I'll tell you right now, child suicide, teen suicide, especially with boys, is on the rise in the United States, because boys tend to have a propensity, if they think a girl is asking for an image, boys are all too excited to send that image, hoping that they're going to get something in exchange. And it's not a girl on the other end. It's a pedophile or it's a trafficker who then threatens these children to expose the dick pic or expose the image unless they send money or unless they give more images. And young boys are killing themselves over this. That's happening here in the United States. And so that's a scary, wow, that's really shocking. I think the thing as dads who's listening to this, what I want to say to you is it may be happening in your home and you would never know, because it takes an incredible amount of humility for a young teenage boy to come to you as a father and say, hey, I did a thing and I sent an image and now this person's threatening me. To come clean with that is just so difficult, especially as dads, if we have not really proven to our kids that we are safe harbor for them, that they can come to us with those types of mistakes. So traffickers count on you as a dad not being a safe harbor for your kids. In fact,
Wow.
the common questions are, how often do your parents check your device? Do they have passwords to your device? And can you get somewhere private? Those are the top three questions that pedophiles and traffickers are asking our teenagers through their video game chat apps that we're not checking. And so what we have done here at the Exodus Road is we developed a training for teens and parents called Influenced: Digital Safety in Our Modern World. And you can access that and reach out to us to participate in that at theexodusroad.com/influenced. And we're bringing this training into schools and into communities around the United States and around the world because, guys, I'm just honest with you, I'm tired of rescuing kids who are being groomed online and being sold online. We have to do a better job as parents saying, hey, our kids are digital natives. They were born into this digital age. We're digital nomads. We grew up in the 80s, most of us, before we walked around with phones in our pocket. So we're having to catch up with what our kids do every day. Like you said, Larry, it's like all these kids have phones. They relate to their friends on phones. And so the answer isn't to just take their phone away. A lot of their world revolves around technology, but we do have a responsibility to be their mentors and coaches about digital safety. And so for us, we really encourage families to have a digital agreement with their teenagers and foster an actual conversation. And what we've found is, the kids who take this training may not admit that they're struggling with some of this stuff, but they have a friend who is, and they'll speak up on behalf of their friend because it's easier for them, and they want to take care of their community and their friend groups against pedophilia or against being targeted by traffickers or child pornographers. And so this training is a way that we can empower and equip dads and moms and families to say, look, there are some dangers out there, and it's all not trafficking. Some of it's just a digital danger that your kid needs to be aware of. They could land themselves in jail for sending a nude that then gets passed around school, because that's child pornography and that's against the law in every state. And if you're the curator or perpetrator of forwarding that image, you've broken the law. And so these are just basic things that are hard to talk about. And I think parents struggle to know how to talk about it. I have 3 teenagers. They don't want to talk about it. But this training is relevant. It's captivating. Lots of science and research has gone into it. You know, children are, every click and ding of the phone sends off a dopamine hit in their brain. And their brains are developing and they become addicted to social media because of what they get from it, that dopamine hit. Well, as parents, we need to know how many hours a day is healthy for our kids to be online. Do you have, how many would you guess, Larry?
I mean, we only let our kids have an hour.
That's amazing. It's kind of like saying how much McDonald's is healthy. You know,
Right.
0 is the answer. But there are researchers and research papers that have come out of universities that say by age group, what is a healthy goal for exposure to online material? And it changes as they grow older. But the younger they are, the least amount of exposure, the better, like you're describing. So all of that research has been compiled into our training called Influenced. Check it out, theexodusroad.com/influenced. Reach out to us, any of our social media accounts. You can ask to be on a newsletter for this Influence training. We're really hoping to bring it into the community because it is a feeding ground for trafficking.
You're doing really good work, man. You really are. One thing I can tell you is that we've gotten a ton of pushback. So my son, as this podcast releases, will be 18 years old in 3 months.
Yeah.
And we just allowed him to have Snapchat just now.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we allowed him to have Snapchat was because so he's also a part of a business entrepreneurial program that's associated with his high school, but he gets to leave high school for half a day and then go does this business entrepreneurial program, which is really cool. They have to like dress up in suits and they go and visit different businesses and they learn how they operate. It's really, really cool. But his subgroup though, where they work on all the projects together and there's a new project every single month, they all communicate via Snapchat. Like literally like text messaging has kind of become obsolete for like these teenagers because that's how they communicate is through Snapchat. And my son was like, Dad, like I'm almost 18, can I have Snapchat? And there's a lot of, we won't get into Snapchat and all the craziness there, but there's a lot of craziness there. But I said, if we're going to do that, I understand why you need it now. But if we're going to do that, then we need to create an agreement. And I want you to take a stab at what this agreement looks like. And the things
Love that.
the things that you identify that you're going to hold to have to be measurable. And we're at 5 p.m. every Sunday, we're going to check in on those things. So like, for instance, he has to have a C or better in every class, no missing assignments. He has to physically work out at least twice a week. Optimal is 3. And I mean, he's in wrestling season right now, so that doesn't matter. He's working his tail off. You have to keep your room clean and your laundry folded and done and all that other good stuff. Basically, what we wanted to do was create some parameters and boundaries of like, yeah, you think that this will not grab your attention and steal it away, but it will literally suck you in. And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly things that you love doing, like working out, suddenly don't become important anymore. Going out for the wrestling team doesn't seem really all that important anymore. You know, folding your laundry or scrolling through Snapchat, the laundry isn't important anymore. But we've got to keep these things on point. And he created the list, which I thought was great.
That is
And I
great.
said, okay. I was like, and he actually created a lot more stuff in there than I wasn't thinking. I was like, it was really good. And so like every Sunday at 5 p.m., let's check your grades. You got missing assignments. Let's check your room. Let's check all these things to make sure none of these things are suffering. So we're going to add something else to pull your attention away. Let's make sure that nothing falls behind. But I think, my kids they complain, they push back, because like we have 60 minutes of screen time on their phones and then all their apps shut down except for text messaging. And then they have to actually request more time if they need it.
Right.
And they don't like that. And I was like, I understand you don't like it. here's what I want to tell you though. I was like, we love you too much, you know, to do that right now. You'll have more freedom with this device later on. And once you're 18
Hmm.
years old, you'll have all the freedom that you want. But what's most important is that we create the habits around what's healthy right now. Because
Hmm.
all these other things, you know, left unchecked won't get done. And I say this very boldly, and it's going to trigger people. But if you're allowing your kid to spend 5, 6, 7 hours on a device scrolling aimlessly, dude, you're missing. Like, that's wrong, in my opinion. And I think it's negligent, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And I tell my kids all the time, I was like, me and your mom putting these restrictions on you is actually harder. And they're like, how so? It has nothing to do with you. I was like, it kind of does. I was like, because, you know, we get to interact with you more, right? We get to do more things as a family, which I'm not saying that's hard, but we love it. But what you don't understand from a parent's perspective is that device in your hand is a wonderful babysitter, and it
Right.
keeps you out of our hair. Like, we can have you go do whatever you want. Me and mom need to do what we need to do, right? I was like, and a lot of parents, like, that's the babysitter. I was like, it's actually easier to set your kid in front of Xbox and have him play Fortnite for 8 hours at a time because you don't have to deal
Right.
with them. I was like, that's not the core values of our family, and that's not how we're going to go about this at all. I was like, and when you're older, you make your own decisions, but we love you too much to do that, and we're not going to do that. That's the easy button, but we're not about easy. So, you know, I share that. I know it's probably triggering for some because they're like, oh, my kid spends 6 hours or whatever, but you know what? You need to take a really good look at that. You really do. All the experts will tell you the same. But I've got your link in the show notes. Is there any, so theexodusroad.com, best way to
Yeah.
find you. What about on social media? What's the best spot?
Uh, yeah, we're on all the big ones, Instagram and Twitter, um, at the Exodus Road. I really believe that a technology agreement is key. And I love that you
Same.
had your son write his own. We have samples of those on our website for you guys where you can have this conversation. And you know, some parents need to lock it down because their kids are higher risk. And maybe there's some more freedoms for those of you who do have that relationship, like it sounds like you have, Larry, where it's like, hey, yeah, Snapchat, but here's some cautions.
Yeah.
And every family's going to arrive at a different place of comfort level with that. But I think as we talk about being a dad in this modern age of technology where it is easy to park your baby in front of a screen, I tell a lot of the men in my life because they ask me about my parenting. I'm like, you know, I don't have all the answers, but I know what my kids need is my time. They need to be with me. What we do might matter, but what matters more is just that they're with me. And so whatever I'm doing, they do with me. We're changing a tire. My daughter and I, we keep bees together. You know, if you ski with your son, or you know, you just have to have that thing that says, look, you're not going to be scrolling. I'm not going to be scrolling. We're going to do something together. We're going to cook together. We're going to be out in the community together. We're going to garden together. We're going to go to events together. You know, find what you love that your kid does and do that with them. My dad did baseball with me. That was his big thing. For my son, we ski. We fly fish together. It's that time. And I think as dads, when they're watching their phones, it frees us up, right? It's like, oh, they're good. We can go do what I want to do. But in the end, the thing that we're going to regret the most is the time we've lost with our precious kids. So I
100%.
just say that as a closing thought that the technology agreements to keep them safe from predators and maybe keep them safe from things that they shouldn't be involved in or see at a particular age they're not ready for. But it's also to protect this safe harbor environment in your home. And you only get that through relationship. You only get that through real time together. So that alone is a reason to investigate how to make your home, the garden and the soil of your home, safe and just relationship rich with your kids.
Kids spell LOVETIME, right?
Yeah.
Matt, I've loved having you on, dude. This has been awesome. You know, just to kind of recap a few things. Marriage is about, you know, how we can work on this together as being best friends, aligned to the same vision, what it means to be the safe harbor in our relationship with our wives and our kids, to show our kids that being human and vulnerable is part of the human experience, but also the tools and the tactics that we use to be better and recover and just to be better individuals. The top three questions that you shared, what a pedophile will ask through a video game or through an online chat. Holy crap, you blew my mind there. And then finally, why we need technology agreements with our kids, and knowing that the last thing we want to lose is time, with our kids, because we only have 18 summers with our kids under our own roof. We're gonna have all the links in the show notes for you guys. If you head on over to thedadedge.com/454 for this show, again, thedadedge.com/454. We'll have the exodusroad.com also, Matt's Instagram handle, which is at the Exodus Road as well. Matt, this was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your time. Thank you for fighting this fight for our kids and for the evil that's out there. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure, man. Thanks,
You
Larry.
bet. You bet. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.